12 armed men had Alessandro Conti backed against a dead-end brick wall. He was out of bullets and bleeding out. His empire was seconds away from collapsing. Then, a homeless woman stepped out of the shadows, flicked a cheap plastic lighter, and turned the alley into an absolute inferno. The freezing October rain of Chicago did nothing to wash away the blood trailing behind Alessandro Conti. At 32, Sandro was the undisputed head of the Conti Syndicate, a criminal enterprise that controlled the city's docks, its underground casinos, and half of its politicians. But tonight, he wasn't a king. He was prey. The sit-down at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse was supposed to be a neutral meeting with the Irish factions. Instead, it was a slaughter. His two best bodyguards were dead before the appetizers arrived, poisoned by the very waitstaff Sandro had tipped generously on his way in. Sandro had barely managed to shoot his way out through the kitchen, taking a grazing bullet to his ribs and a deep graze to his left thigh. Now, he was dragging his body through the labyrinthine, subterranean streets of Lower Wacker Drive. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, sickly yellow shadows. His breathing was ragged, echoing off the damp concrete walls. He ducked into a narrow, unlit service alley, hoping to find a maintenance stairwell to the surface. It was a dead end. A solid wall of iron-reinforced cinder blocks stared back at him. Before he could turn back, the splashing of heavy combat boots echoed at the alley's entrance. Headlights from 3 black SUVs cut through the darkness, blinding him. The doors opened, and 12 men stepped out. They were heavily armed, carrying suppressed submachine guns and tactical shotguns. Leading the pack was Finnick Gallagher, a ruthless enforcer known for collecting the teeth of his targets. End of the line, Conti. Finnick's voice boomed, dripping with a thick, arrogant drawl. I gotta admit, you run fast for a guy missing half his blood, but my boss wants your head on a silver platter, and I'm not keen on making him wait. Sandro leaned against the cold brick, his tailored charcoal suit soaked in dark crimson. He raised his empty Glock, dropping the magazine to show it was tapped out. 12 men for one bleeding guy. Finnick? You always were a coward. Finnick chuckled, raising his weapon. The 11 men behind him mirrored the movement. The metallic clacking of guns chambering rounds echoed like a death knell. Sandro closed his eyes. He didn't pray men like him didn't have the right to, but he braced himself for the end. Hey, back off my house. The voice was harsh, raspy, and distinctly female. Finnick and his men turned, confused. Stepping out from behind a massive, overflowing industrial dumpster was a woman. She was covered in layers of oversized, grime-stained coats. A knitted beanie was pulled low over her matted blonde hair. She looked like a ghost of the city, one of the thousands of invisible souls wandering the streets. Get lost. Trash. One of the hitmen sneered, taking a step toward her. Or you die with him. The woman didn't flinch. Her name was Ciara Sterling. For the last 3 years, these brutal, forgotten tunnels had been her sanctuary. She knew every crack in the concrete, every leaking pipe, and every hidden danger. And she knew exactly what was sitting directly above the men's heads. An exposed, heavily corroded main gas line that had been leaking for weeks, pooling invisible, highly flammable vapor under the alley's low concrete overhang. I said, Ciara repeated, her voice dropping to a dead, icy calm. Back off. From her oversized coat pocket, she pulled out a standard, bright yellow Bic lighter. In her other hand, she held a half-empty can of industrial-grade starting fluid she used to start trash barrel fires in the winter. Finnick laughed. A harsh, barking sound. What are you gonna do with that, sweetheart? Singe my eyebrows? Something like that, Ciara whispered. She didn't aim at the men. She aimed upward, straight at the heavy concentration of trapped gas near the ceiling. She held the lighter in front of the nozzle, depressed the aerosol button, and created a makeshift flamethrower. The stream of fire shot upward, illuminating her grimy, determined face in a flash of brilliant orange. The moment the flame connected with the dense pocket of leaking utility gas, the air itself seemed to rip open. Boom! A concussive shockwave of fire and pressure detonated above the hitmen. The blast blew out the streetlights and sent a rain of fire down on the 12 men. Agonized screams filled the alley as the flash fire ignited their heavy coats and hair. Finnick was thrown backward into the hood of the SUV, temporarily blinded and shrieking as he batted at the flames, licking his jacket. Complete chaos erupted. Guns discharged blindly into the ceiling and the floor as the men scrambled in a panicked frenzy, desperate to extinguish themselves. Sandro shielded his face from the intense heat, utterly stunned. Before he could process what had just happened, a small, remarkably strong hand gripped the collar of his ruined suit jacket. "Move, pretty boy. Unless you want to be well done," Ciara ordered, her grip like a vice. She dragged him toward the back corner of the alley, kicking aside a rusted sheet of corrugated metal to reveal a tight, dark utility shaft. She shoved Sandro inside, tossing his heavy frame down a short chute before diving in after him and pulling the metal sheet back into place. Above them, the sounds of shouting, sirens, and blazing fire raged on, completely masking their escape. Sandro hit the bottom of the chute hard, his injured ribs screaming in protest. He rolled onto a damp, concrete floor in pitch blackness, gasping for air. The heavy scent of mold, old water, and cheap antiseptic filled his nostrils. A moment later, a beam of light clicked on. Ciara stood over him, holding an old military-grade flashlight. She had kicked off her heavy outer coat, revealing a surprisingly lean, athletic frame in a faded flannel shirt and cargo pants. She didn't look like a typical street wanderer. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and completely devoid of fear. "Get up," she commanded. "We can't stay here. The fire will only distract them for a few minutes. If Gallagher realizes we didn't burn, they'll start searching the grates." "You know Finnick?" Sandro grunted, struggling to his feet. "I live on the streets of Chicago," Ciara replied, slinging a duffel bag over her shoulder. "If you don't know the monsters who run the underworld, you end up in the river. Now walk." She led him deeper into the labyrinth of the city's forgotten sub-basements. They moved for what felt like hours, navigating through rusted catacombs and abandoned Prohibition-era smuggling tunnels. Sandro's vision began to blur. The blood loss was catching up to him. He stumbled, his shoulder slamming into a brick wall. I need a minute," he choked out, sliding down the wall. Ciara stopped and shone the flashlight on him. A massive pool of blood was expanding across his left thigh. The bullet graze was deeper than he thought, and an artery was dangerously close to being compromised. She sighed, a sound of heavy irritation. "Great. I save a Mafia prince, and he's going to bleed out on my living room floor." "Your living room?" Ciara swept the flashlight around. They were in a large, subterranean vaulted chamber. It was surprisingly organized. A cot, with clean military blankets, sat in the corner. Shelves made from repurposed pallets held canned food, bottled water, and a stunningly comprehensive array of medical supplies. She knelt beside him, producing a pair of trauma shears from her belt, and sliced open his expensive trousers without a second thought. "Hey, those cost $3,000. Sandro managed to smirk, trying to mask the blinding pain. "I'll write you an IOU, she shot back. What happened next shocked him. Ciara moved with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency. She cleaned the wound with saline, applied a tourniquet to slow the bleeding, and pulled out a sterile suture kit. She didn't hesitate or shake. Her hands were incredibly precise as she began to stitch the torn flesh, applying a local anesthetic she somehow had in her stash. Sandro watched her through half-closed eyes. "You stitch like a cardiovascular surgeon. Who the hell are you?" Ciara didn't look up, her eyes focused entirely on the needle. "Just a ghost, Conti. Don't try to figure me out. You saved my life. The Conti family owes you. Name your price. A penthouse. $1 million. A ticket out of this city, it's yours." Ciara finally stopped, tying off the final stitch. She looked him dead in the eyes, and Sandro saw a deep, unhealed bitterness lingering there. "I don't want your blood money, Alessandro. I want you out of my bunker before sunrise. I intervened because I hate Gallagher. But make no mistake, I despise your kind just as much." Before Sandro could press her further, a sharp, vibrating buzz echoed in the quiet chamber. Sandro's burner phone, safely tucked in his inner jacket pocket, was ringing. It was a secure line, one only 3 people in the world had the number to. He pulled it out with a trembling hand. A text message glowed on the screen. It was from his most trusted informant at the police precinct. "Sandro, The hit wasn't the Irish. It was internal. Your brother, Matteo, orchestrated the massacre at Gibson's. He just took over the main warehouse and declared you dead. He put a $5 million bounty on your head and another $5 million for the blonde vagrant who helped you escape. Everyone is looking for you. Sandro's blood ran cold. His own brother, Matteo, the man he had protected since childhood, the man he had groomed to be his second in command, had arranged for him to be butchered in an alley. He looked up at Ciara, who was wiping the blood off her hands with a rag. "We have a problem," Sandro said, his voice dangerously low. "You have a problem," Chiara corrected, turning her back to him. "No. Sandro insisted, turning the phone screen toward her. "The man who set me up is my brother, and because you decided to play pyromaniac tonight, he just put a $5 million bounty on your head, too." Ciara stared at the screen, the color slowly draining from her dirt-smudged face. $5 million. Every hitman, gangbanger, and corrupt cop in Chicago would be tearing the city apart to find her. Her hidden life, the sanctuary she had built over 3 agonizing years, was destroyed in an instant. "You brought this to my door," she whispered, her hands balling into fists. "I didn't ask you to step in," Sandro fired back, pushing himself up to a seated position. "But you did, and now we are tied together. If you want to survive, you need my resources, and I need your knowledge of these tunnels to get out of the city." Ciara let out a dark, humorless laugh. She paced the length of the chamber, her mind racing. Then, she stopped and looked at him, her expression hardening into something terrifyingly cold. "You want to know who I am, Conti?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "My name is Ciara Sterling. 3 years ago, I was the head trauma nurse at St. Jude's Hospital. I was on shift the night your father, Lorenzo Conti, was brought in with a gunshot wound. I saved his life." Sandro's eyes widened. He remembered that night. His father had survived an assassination attempt, only to die mysteriously 2 days later in the ICU. "The next day," Ciara continued, stepping closer to him, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper, "someone injected a lethal dose of potassium into his IV, but the security footage was wiped. And your brother, Matteo, needed a scapegoat to keep the rival families from going to war. So, he framed the nurse who was on duty, me." Sandro was entirely paralyzed. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in his mind. "Matteo ruined my life," Ciara said, tears of pure anger welling in her eyes. "He stripped my medical license, framed me for murder, and sent men to burn down my apartment. I had to fake my own death and hide in the sewers just to keep breathing. I lost everything because of the Conti family." Silence hung heavy in the damp underground air. The man she had just saved from burning alive was the heir to the empire that had destroyed her. "And now," Ciara said, picking up a heavy iron crowbar from the floor, "you're sitting in my home, alone, bleeding, and there's a $5 million bounty on your head." Ciara stood over Sandro, the heavy iron crowbar trembling in her grip. The knuckles of her hands were white, her breathing shallow and erratic. 3 years of sleeping on damp concrete, eating out of dented cans, and looking over her shoulder at every shadow, had culminated in this exact moment. The brother of the man who destroyed her life was sitting on her floor, bleeding and helpless. "One swing," Ciara whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her trauma. "One swing and I get justice for what your family did to me." Sandro didn't flinch. He looked up at the weapon, then directly into her eyes. He didn't beg. Men who begged in his world died anyway. "If you kill me, Ciara, you get revenge," Sandro said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the agonizing pain radiating from his thigh. "But you don't get your life back. You'll still be a ghost. You'll still be hiding in the sewers while my brother sits in a 3-story penthouse at the St. Regis, Chicago, drinking $1,000 scotch and laughing at both of us." Ciara's grip on the crowbar tightened, but she didn't swing. She listened. "Matteo is meticulous," Sandro continued, sensing her hesitation. "He doesn't trust anyone. Not the hitmen, not his accountants, not even his own shadow. That means he kept the evidence. He has a physical ledger, an encrypted hard drive, locked in a biometric safe in his private office at the Navy Pier warehouse. It contains every bribe, every hit, and every frame-up he's orchestrated over the last 5 years. Including yours. Slowly, the tip of the crowbar lowered to the concrete floor with a dull clang. "You're lying to save your own skin," she accused, though the venom had slightly drained from her voice. "I'm a lot of things, Ciara, but I don't lie to the people holding the weapon," Sandro grunted, pulling himself up to sit on the edge of her makeshift cot. "You want your medical license back? You want to walk in the sunlight without looking over your shoulder? Get me into that warehouse. Help me kill Finnick Gallagher and take back my syndicate. I'll hand you the drive, and my personal lawyers, the best money can buy in Illinois, will have your name cleared in 48 hours. It was a devil's bargain. But as Ciara looked around her damp, pathetic underground cell, she knew she had no other choice. She was tired of surviving. She wanted to live. "Fine," she snapped, tossing the crowbar aside. "But if you double-cross me, Conti, I swear to God I will use the rest of that anesthetic to paralyze you, and I will leave you for the rats." "Deal," Sandro said, extending a blood-stained hand. Ciara ignored it. "We need a plan," she said, shifting into a cold, clinical mode. "Gallagher has 50 armed men locking down the Navy Pier district. The police are bought off. We have 2 people, one of whom has a hole in his leg. What exactly are we working with?" Sandro pulled out his burner phone and a small ring of keys. "I have a contingency stash hidden in an abandoned subway maintenance locker 2 miles from here. If we can reach it, we level the playing field. Tactical inventory and asset evaluation." Ciara grabbed a piece of charcoal and began writing on the cinder block wall to map out their survival strategy. They needed to assess their absolute resources. Asset type, description, strategic value, weapons. Current, 1 empty Glock 19, 1 crowbar, medical shears. Extremely low, useless in a firefight. Weapons. Stash, 2 M4 carbines, 4 frag grenades, tactical vests. High, essential for breaching Mateo's compound. Logistics. Ciara's knowledge of the subterranean steam tunnels. Critical. The only way to bypass Mateo's perimeter security unseen. Intelligence. Sandro's knowledge of the warehouse layout. Critical. Allows for a surgical strike directly to the main office. "Okay," Ciara said, stepping back from the wall. "The warehouse sits directly above an old city drainage main that connects to the lake. The grate is rusted shut, but I have enough thermite powder saved up from scavenging construction sites to melt the lock. We go under the street, breach the floor, and come up right inside the loading dock. From there, it's a straight shot up the freight elevator to Mateo's office." Sandro nodded, deeply impressed by the former nurse's tactical mind. "But Gallagher will have guards stationed at the elevator banks. The infiltration strategy. Asterisk. Phase 1. The distraction. Ciara will bypass the main water valve and flood the lower sub-basement of the warehouse, forcing Mateo's men to investigate the power failures. Asterisk. Phase 2. The breach. Sandro will utilize the heavy weaponry from the stash to eliminate the remaining guards in the lobby, drawing the bulk of the syndicate's firepower away from the executive floor. Asterisk. Phase 3. The acquisition. While Sandro holds the line, Ciara will use the maintenance shafts to bypass the crossfire, enter Mateo's office, and force him to open the biometric safe to retrieve the hard drive. "It's a suicide mission," Ciara muttered, packing her duffel bag with every piece of medical equipment she had left. "Only if we miss," Sandro replied, loading a fresh magazine he found in her scavenged supplies into his Glock. "Let's go hunting." By 3 a.m., the storm raging outside had intensified, masking the sounds of Ciara and Sandro navigating the flooded, rat-infested drainage pipe beneath Navy Pier. The freezing water lapped at their waists. Sandro pushed through the agony in his leg, fueled entirely by the adrenaline of impending vengeance. They reached the heavy iron grate directly beneath the warehouse. Ciara applied her homemade thermite paste, struck a match, and shielded her eyes. The chemical reaction burned with a blinding, terrifying heat, melting the heavy iron lock into glowing slag in seconds. They breached the lower levels of the warehouse, moving silently through the shadows of stacked shipping crates. They found Sandro's hidden locker exactly where he left it. As he strapped on a Kevlar vest and racked the bolt of a matte black M4 carbine, he looked like a completely different man. The injured prey was gone. The Mafia kingpin had returned. Suddenly, the screech of a radio echoed from the catwalk above them. I got a breached grate in Sector 4. We got company. So much for stealth, Sandro growled. Execute Phase 1. Go. Sandro stepped out from the cover of the crates and opened fire. The deafening roar of the M4 shattered the silence of the warehouse. 2 guards on the catwalk dropped instantly. Sirens blared, and floodlights snapped on, illuminating the massive concrete structure. While Sandro drew the heavy fire, diving behind a forklift as bullets chewed the concrete around him, Ciara scrambled up a rusted maintenance ladder, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't a soldier, she was a healer. But tonight, the only way to save her own life was to ruin someone else's. She reached the 3rd-floor ventilation shaft, crawling on her stomach through the narrow, dust-choked metal tube until she was positioned directly over Matteo Conti's luxurious, glass-walled office. Through the grate, she saw him. Matteo. He was dressed in a pristine white suit, frantically packing stacks of cash and bearer bonds into a leather briefcase. Standing beside him, barking orders into a radio, was Finnick Gallagher. Ciara kicked the ventilation grate with both boots. It gave way with a loud crash, and she dropped into the office, landing heavily on the mahogany desk. Finnick spun around, drawing his weapon, but Ciara was faster. She grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the desk and swung it with all her might, catching the massive hitman square in the jaw. Finnick stumbled backward, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. Before Matteo could react, Ciara tackled him to the floor, pinning him with a desperate, feral strength. She pressed the tip of her medical shears directly against his carotid artery. "Call them off!" she screamed, her eyes blazing with an unholy fury. "Call off your men right now, or I'll bleed you out on your own imported rug." Matteo stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. He recognized her. "You, the nurse." "Surprise, you son of a bitch," she hissed, pressing the blade hard enough to draw a bead of blood. "Open the safe." Suddenly, a massive hand gripped Ciara by her hair, ripping her off Matteo. Finnick had recovered. He threw her across the room, her body slamming brutally into a glass display case. "I'm gonna enjoy gutting you, street rat," Finnick snarled, pulling a serrated combat knife from his belt. Before he could take a step toward her, the reinforced glass doors of the office blew inward in a shower of explosive shards. Sandro stepped through the smoke, his M4 smoking, his suit torn to shreds, covered in the blood of a dozen men. "Leave her alone, Finnick," Sandro commanded, tossing the empty rifle aside and drawing his combat knife. The 2 men clashed. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Finnick had the advantage in size and stamina, but Sandro fought with the desperate, calculated rage of a betrayed king. Finnick slashed out, cutting Sandro across the forearm, but Sandro absorbed the blow, stepping into the guard, trapping Finnick's arm, and driving his own blade deep into the hitman's collarbone. Finnick gasped, dropping his knife, and collapsed to the floor in a pool of his own blood. Sandro turned to his brother. Matteo was backed against the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the churning, black waters of Lake Michigan. He was trembling. "Sandro, please," Matteo begged, holding his hands up. "It was business. The families. They wanted a new direction. Dad was too old school, and you were too stubborn. I had to do it." Sandro pulled out his burner phone and tapped the screen. The speakerphone clicked on. "We heard enough, Sandro." An old, gravelly voice echoed from the phone. It was Don Carmine, the head of the ruling commission in New York. Sandro had dialed him in the moment he breached the building. Matteo's face went completely pale. He hadn't just confessed to his brother. He had confessed to patricide in front of the entire national syndicate. A death sentence. "The commission handles its own," Sandro said coldly. He turned to Ciara, who was pulling herself up from the shattered glass. "Get the drive." Matteo, utterly defeated, pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner hidden behind a painting. The steel safe clicked open. Ciara reached inside and pulled out a heavy, encrypted solid-state drive. She clutched it to her chest, as if it were oxygen. "It's over," Sandro said, looking at his brother one last time. "You have exactly 10 minutes before the commission's cleaners arrive, Matteo. I suggest you pray." Sandro and Ciara walked out of the office. leaving Mateo completely alone to face the monsters he had courted. 6 months later, the underground tunnels of Chicago were nothing more than a bad memory for Ciara Sterling. Sitting in a brightly lit, state-of-the-art office at the newly opened Lorenzo Conti Memorial Trauma Center, Ciara looked at her framed, fully reinstated medical license on the wall. Sandro had kept his word. His lawyers had dismantled Mateo's frame-up, exposed the corrupted evidence, and cleared her name entirely. The door to her office opened, and Sandro walked in. He wore a sharp, navy blue suit, a silver cane resting in his right hand to favor his healing leg. He looked like a legitimate businessman now, having restructured his empire to focus on real estate and legal shipping, honoring a promise he made to himself in the dark of the sewers. "The clinic looks good, Doctor Sterling," Sandro smiled, placing a cup of expensive coffee on her desk. "It's only possible because of your anonymous donation, Mr. Conti," Ciara replied, taking a sip. "Though I still don't completely trust you." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Sandro chuckled. He turned to look out the window at the bustling Chicago skyline. They were two people from entirely different worlds, bound together by blood, fire, and a debt that could never truly be repaid. They weren't friends, but they were survivors. And in their world, that was the strongest bond of all. Did you expect that explosive twist? The line between a ruthless mafia kingpin and a forgotten street savior is thinner than you think. If Ciara and Sandro's story of betrayal, revenge, and unlikely alliances kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this incredible true crime-inspired drama with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, pulse-pounding underground stories. Would you like me to write a prequel focusing on how Ciara originally discovered the truth at Street Jude's hospital?